Thanks, Anthony. And that last story is pretty terrifying. My gosh, so many moments are captured on camera now, and we're seeing it all on play for the world at large. Everybody, you can go to Law&Crime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. Now, we're going to switch gears right now and focus on our main live trial here on Law&Crime, and that is the Denise Williams case. Now, this is really something picked out of a torrid soap opera. This is really what it's about. A woman is on trial for plotting the death of her husband, who disappeared 18 years ago. His body was found last year, and it's alleged that she and her lover, Brian Winchester, who is her husband, Mike Williams' best friend, that they plotted together to get rid of him, make it look like a boating accident in order to collect the proceeds of a life insurance policy. That is just the backstory. But if you want to learn some more details of it, here's a report explaining a little bit more about this trial. And again, we're waiting to go live, and this is going to be day one. Take a look.
A Florida woman is facing life in prison for allegedly helping to plot her husband's murder. Denise Williams is on trial for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact for her involvement in the 2000 disappearance and death of her husband, Jerry Michael Williams. Mike was reported missing in December of 2000 after not returning home from a duck hunting trip on Lake Seminole. A few years after the couple married in 1994, Williams is accused of encouraging her husband to take out 3 life insurance policies, totaling over $1.7 million. 2 of these 3 policies were signed off on by the victim's best friend, Brian Winchester. Winchester and Williams allegedly began having an affair in 1997, and according to interviews by Winchester, the two began planning Mike's death at least 10 months before he went missing. The indictment claims that Williams collaborated on planning the death of Michael Williams, who ultimately died at the hands of Winchester. William began filing to collect the benefits of the life insurance policies just 11 days after Mike went missing. A separate indictment on insurance fraud charges claims Williams reported her husband's death as accidental drowning. Williams and Winchester married in 2005 but split a number of years later. Winchester is currently serving 20 years in prison for a kidnapping charge in 2016 when he held Denise at gunpoint in her car for a number of hours. After he pled no contest to the charges, he agreed to provide information on Michael's death, implicating Denise in this twisted plot and taking investigators to Mike's body in 2017. Williams is pleading not guilty to the charges, claiming she had nothing to do with the murder. For Law & Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
And the award for worst couple in history. That's clearly what's going on here. Rachel, great reporting. And we are expecting to go live in this trial any moment. It's going to start up, and we're going to learn more of the details in the opening statements. But I know somebody who's been following this case for years. A friendly face here on the network, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Joseph, great to see you.
Hey, Jesse. How are you?
Good. So you tell me, you've been following this case for quite some time. This is day one in her trial. What do you think?
I didn't think we'd ever get to this point. It seems like this thing's been going on forever and ever, and super bizarre. When you mentioned even the minds in Hollywood couldn't think up something like this, or maybe they could. I don't know. It's filled with debauchery, deception. And, of course, ultimately a brutal homicide, which is what this goes to the heart of in this case. And one of the most compelling things as people will begin to listen to this case, to this trial unfold before them, is the length of time that has transpired since that moment in time when he went out of that boat in Seminole. And till he was eventually found 17 years later, which for us from a forensic perspective is a monumental task to put everything together.
So we're waiting for the live feed in the courtroom. I want to ask you another question while I have you. 17 years. How are those remains not found in that time?
Well, initially he did a bang-up job of concealing the remains, assuming that he is the one that did it, right?
You're talking about Brian Winchester, right?
Yeah, Brian Winchester, and he was sequestered in an area, but isn't it interesting how, going back to this theme of fiction, I mean, real life is stranger than fiction. They always talk about perpetrators returning to the scene of the crime. That's going to be key in this particular case, because he would periodically come back and check on the body and this sort of thing, and which adds another bizarre level to this. And I can't wait to hear the narrative that the prosecutor is going to portray in this case. It's going to be a compelling story for everyone that's watching this. Any trial watcher, get ready, because it's going to be markedly interesting.
I mean, it's literally something out of a movie. A love triangle to collect insurance proceeds. This sounds like every movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, you've got the widow, having signed off on this thing. Ask the husband to get it out. It's very noir. Take out these insurance policies in advance. You've got her calling in within 10 days. 10 days of this man's disappearance, trying to claim the money, and it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it really is. All right, here's what we're going to do. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're hopefully going to be live in that courtroom. Today is day one in the Denise Williams case, and if you're just joining us, nothing has started yet. You should stay with us. You'll be right at the beginning. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Back to Law and Crime, everybody. You're joining us at a great time. The trial of Denise Williams is about to begin. This is day one. This woman who's on trial for plotting plotting the murder of her husband 18 years ago. It's alleged that her lover at the time, Brian Winchester, who was her husband's best friend, that she plotted with him. Brian killed him, made it look like a boating accident. His body hasn't been found. And then 17 years later, last year, Brian Winchester confessed to police, showed them where Mike's remains were, and that is where we are at right now. Now, she is claiming that she's completely innocent. She has nothing to do with this. This is going to be a case to follow. Now, what you see right now is the jury is coming in. We're waiting for them to be seated. I'm here with Joseph Scott Morgan, who's an expert on this case, knows everything about it. Joseph, if I can get one question from you before we begin, I might have to interrupt. His body was found in the mud along the banks of Carr Lake in Leon County. Is that an area you think that you could dispose of a body and just no one will see it for 17 years?
Yeah, it's kind of I'm not going to say vast emptiness, but it is not an area that the public would be prone to, kind of wander through quite a bit. It's not heavily trafficked. So, yeah, it would be an interesting disposal area, that's for sure.
Yeah, okay. So the judge is speaking to the jury. We're going to go live. Let's do it. Okay, let's, as the judge speaks to the jury right now, this is very standard jury instructions. I want to talk about one of the more interesting aspects of this case with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, we found out that Brian Winchester, the lover, the ex-lover of the defendant, the one who's claimed to have fired the shots that ultimately killed Mike Williams, the real killer in this case. The question is, was he under the direction of the defendant to do this? He confessed and was granted immunity, and he may testify in this trial against his former lover. This is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's. I think that it's very compelling in this particular case because that's what for trial watchers, that's what everyone wants to see. They want to hear this narrative played out before them. And one of the things I find fascinating about this is kind of the intersectionality with the courts and the internet now. You think about how we kind of blindly bumped around in the past relative to cases. Now everything is at your fingertips. This case, Jesse, is so layered with evidence and comments and movements and just the narrative that's put forth by the media that how tempting it must be for a jury that's just trying to get this straight in their mind to find any kind of information out about this, because the players, it's I'm not going to say rogues gallery, but it's an interesting group of people that have their own backstory. I think that it's, as human beings, we want to know more about what's going on. So this is a real temptation that the judge is addressing with them, and I think that it's going to be, he's already had to chastise someone about this. I think that this is going to be just absolutely fascinating for the jury to have to deal with.
Yep. And this is a very high-profile trial. Let's go to a break, and when we come back, we'll be live in the courtroom. Wow, I don't even know where to begin with this. This opening statement was incredible. So many details to dissect, and I'm back here with Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University. I think I'm still reeling from the last thing that the prosecutor just said, that message that Denise Williams allegedly sent, that tell Marcus, Brian Winchester's dad, to tell Brian that I didn't say anything to the cops. Let's just start there, Joseph. That is a huge admission, and it's basically going to be recapped in a conversation that we're going to hear later on in this trial between, Denise and another person. This is pretty huge when the jury would hear that.
Yeah. I wanted to keep my mouth shut, but I just didn't have the ability. And it is going to be captivating, wow, what a narrative relative to this. It's almost like she's slipping her head into a noose in this particular instance. I was gripped by this opening statement. I think prosecution did a fantastic job.
Very good job detailing 18 years of what's happened, and I want to get into the meat of this, right? So let's focus first on the lake. That was one of the first things that we heard about, right? So he disappears 18 years ago. There's a search trying to find him. No one can find anything about him. Can you explain a little bit more about this lake and the idea of submersion? I mean, really, his remains weren't found until Brian Winchester told police 17 years later.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the general public, when you hear lake, you think these vast bodies of water that you go boating on, and people up north go to the Great Lakes, and even down here in the South, we have big lakes down here as well. To call this a lake is a geographer would argue with me. This is a gigantic mud hole, is what it comes down to. We heard them. Prosecution already talked about how it had been a pecan orchard that was flooded. You've got all of these stumps just underlying the surface, and people do drown in these things, but they're very, very shallow. The bodies will get hung up in debris many times, and will preclude them from being able to float back up to the top. And one of the things that we look for in drownings, Jesse, is it's a normal biological process that when a body decomposes, eventually that body will literally float back to the top because of the gaseous swelling that takes place. That never happened in this case, and I think that left them scratching their heads. It's not like, this guy fell out of a boat at a depth of, 200 feet or something. We're talking about greatest depth is about 12 to 13 feet, and that's variable dependent upon the weather, dependent upon dam releases, all that sort of thing. So it's not a real deep body of water. So you've got all of the Department of Wildlife Fisheries that are out there. They're searching. This is something they do on a regular basis, and they just can't come up with this guy's body. I think that it probably for a lot of the old timers, it made them sit around and kind of scratch their head and think, there might be a bit more to this than meets the eye. But at the end of the day, they didn't have a corpus delicti, so it was kind of a no-go at that point.
Yeah, they didn't have any answers to what happened to him, and it was maybe feasible. At one point, I know they were suggesting that he might have been eaten by alligators. In that area. And I want to just go back to the prosecution's opening statement when they talk about the lake, and then I want to go back to Joseph to talk about really this body was moved and put in a mud pit. So let's listen to the prosecution's opening statement about the lake. All right, so we're listening to details of how Mike Williams was shot. His body wasn't found for years, and now we are in 2018, and his wife is on trial for allegedly plotting his murder. Okay, back here with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, the idea of this body being put in these mud banks, right, hasn't been found for 17 years. What does that do to a body?
Well, the body is still going to be a natural biological process where the body will begin to break down. And if we were in court, Jesse, and we took the images, say, from the grave, this sort of thing, and put them up in court, that it would be rather it would be very sensational. It would be something that people would turn their eyes away, deflect their view because of what they would see. It wouldn't just, in some cases, buried in mud like this. Sometimes you'll still have some soft tissue, so it's very graphic. But, you know, one of the really cool things about this is the fact that they did the x-rays, Jesse. They did the x-rays, and that is a moment that is literally captured in time. When you saw that and they had this kind of lead storm that was captured in that x-ray inside of that cranial vault, that tells the story. It talks about this shotgun blast that took place all these years ago, and you can't, that's very, very difficult to defeat. Then they're going to show close-ups, I can guarantee you, in the courtroom of the actual spot of entry, where they'll have a picture of the skull, and it'll show this large defect where the shotgun blast went in and it captured. They were using birdshot. This is not buckshot. So people at home, I'll just think about tiny little BBs as opposed to big slugs. That's what ended this guy's life, and it is going to be something when they parade this in front of the jury and essentially, you know, in front of everybody that's viewing.
Yeah, what they said was that gunshot is consistent with Brian Winchester's story, that he said he shot him, close range, disposed of his body. The idea of a shotgun blast, is that an instantaneous death?
Well, that all depends on where the individual is shot, of course. In the head like this, it would be really, it would be very interesting. I think what is going to be even more compelling about this is this something he did almost execution style. Is this fellow shot, did he see it coming at him, or was he shot in the back of the head? You know, what was the relationship between, and I'm talking about in the physical relationship between the shooter and the victim in this particular case. Again, there's so many layers of dynamics here, you know, where they'll begin to talk about that this is just a cold-blooded event.
And Joseph, Brian Winchester, the gunman, was granted immunity. Okay? He's off the hook. That's the craziest part. And a little bit later on, we're going to get Marnie Jo Snyder in to talk about the legal ramifications of all this, because I need to make sense of it. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we might be live in that courtroom for the defense's opening statement. We'll be right back. So Greg Morris is basically describing when he gets this call about an overdue duck hunter, Mike Williams. He reports, tries to find him, can't find him. We know the story. Mike Williams' body wasn't found until 17 years later. I'm back here with Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University, our forensic death investigator of this morning, talking about the details of this crime. And I'm very curious, since we have to sign you off, unfortunately, your final thoughts to our audience as we continue our coverage here on day one of the Denise Williams trial.
I think that it's, you know, it's obviously goes without stating that this is, in fact, a homicide that's already been confessed to. The difficult part, the linchpin to all of this, is the connectivity between all of this physical evidence that we have, of course, the mortal remains and everything else, back to Denise Williams. Is the prosecutor going to be able to push this across the goal line in order to convince the jury that there is connectivity here going back all of these years? And it's going to be very compelling, very gripping in this case to be able to watch and listen as these people recall from all these years ago. They're out there. And this is something that stuck with these people, Jesse.
Yeah.
This case has been in the forefront of their memory for years.
Yep, and it's something we probably won't forget. Joseph, thank you so much. We're going to take a break, and one of the things that we can't wait for is when Brian Winchester takes the stand. We'll be right back.